Okay, well, we're ready to go here on the next session, and really appreciate you participating in this. This one is going to be significant for some of you. For some of you, it won't relate, but for some others, relate very, very much. And I want to tell you, if you're one of the ones that says, you know what, Larry, I don't have any of these issues, I still want you to listen and learn well, because you have friends that do. You see, we're going to spend this time talking about the obstacles. What do we do when there's obstacles? And I want you to open your notes, if you haven't already done so, to the next chapter, to the next session, the session on this, overcoming the obstacles of grandparenting. And I want you to notice this, that the barriers of grandparenting, if you say, I've got a barrier, the barriers can almost always be summarized in the word distance. But the thing is, there's more than one kind of distance. There is geographical distance, and how many of you have grandchildren that live, you say, yeah, they're at a distance, I can't see them all the time. Yeah, so many of us have grandchildren that are a little ways away. But then that's enough of a barrier. What if your grandchildren, for example, live across the ocean? How do you do that? How do you connect? Well, technology's made it a lot easier for that, but distance is one, geographical distance. One that's worse is relational distance. So what if your son and daughter-in-law get divorced, and she gets custody of the kids, and she's mad at your son, and she takes it out on you and won't let you see the grandkids because she's mad? That's relational distance. How do you overcome that? What do you do if there's relational distance? What do you do if there's spiritual distance? What if you have a son like the one that I mentioned earlier in the seminar, of the lady that said, my son said that I can see my granddaughter, talk to her about God, but I can't do both? What about another grandma that came to me and said, you know, I raised all three of my kids in the church, but they've all converted to Buddhism, and they don't want me talking about spiritual things? What if there are those kinds of things? There are many of us that have one of the deepest heartaches of life is that there is a broken relationship. There's a barrier that keeps us from being able to impact our grandchildren. And that's what we're going to spend our time talking about. And if you're one of the fortunate ones that is participating in this seminar and you have no barriers, I have some advice for you as well. In addition to listening for your friends, I want to tell you something else. If you are fortunate and your kids are following God, walking with God, and your grandkids are growing up to do that, you be really careful about how you talk about that with your other grandparent friends. You know, we can brag about it, we can talk about it in a way that is just like a kick in the gut to the grandparents who've done everything they could and tried their hardest to see their kids follow God, but they had one walk away. And you, by lifting up your kids and what they do well, are essentially shaming the person who's given it everything they got and their child made a different decision. You be careful about how you respond. Is that a good word of advice? You be careful. So how common is this thing of distance? How common is it, especially concerning the spiritual distance? Well, what we found in our informal surveys and in the seminars that we have done is about 2/3 of us have at least one of our adult children that is not living for God like they would. And you know, like they should. And you know, it's not something we talk about a lot. In fact, we tend to kind of smooth it over, cover it up a little bit in church life, because we don't want everybody to know about what's happening. But the fact is, it's very, very common. And if you are here as a grandparent, and you're listening to this, and you think you're all alone because your kids walked away, I want to tell you, you're not alone. That there are many of us that are struggling with this. It is an incredibly common problem, and we want to encourage one another and help one another. So let's talk about the first one, and I'm going to talk about this one very briefly, and then more about the others. But before I do, I want you to see a video. This video is by Wayne Rice, and we're just so excited because one of the new books that we have is this one called Long Distance Grandparenting. Wayne Rice is a member of our team. He's an incredible, amazing man. He is considered one of the fathers of youth ministry in America. He started Youth Specialties many years ago and has been one of the primary voices and authorities in youth ministry for 50 years in America. And he wrote this book, Long Distance Grandparenting, and I want you to watch this video segment of him just sharing about his experience as a long-distance grandparent and some ideas from him on this topic, okay? Let's watch the video.
My wife and I are long-distance grandparents now. About 3 years ago, our children had to move because of job opportunities, and they took our 5 grandchildren with them. And so we've had to learn how to become long-distance grandparents. One of the things that I've learned is it's okay to be a long-distance grandparent. You don't have to feel guilty about it. You don't have to be overwhelmed by it, but instead you can be motivated by it. In fact, I think you can look at long-distance grandparenting in one of 3 ways. One, you could say, well, because our grandkids live so far away, that's an excuse for not doing anything. And I know some some grandparents who, because their kids live so far away, they just feel like they're off the hook. A second response is to see it as an obstacle that's just so big that it's impossible to overcome. It doesn't have to be that. Instead, we try to look at it as an opportunity. In fact, it motivates us to want to stay connected with our grandchildren on a more intentional basis. And so we look for ways to get in touch with them, to stay connected, to have an influence even though we are disconnected by so many miles. That's the way I believe that long-distance grandparenting should be approached.
Did you enjoy that? That was a great video. Really good. So let me just add a little bit to some of the things that Wayne said and add a few of my ideas, because I also have grandparents that live at a distance, and I want to give you some things to fill into your notes in your book. But I would just give you quickly these 3 words of advice. Number 1, you need to communicate as much as you can to your grandkids. For some of you, that means that you have to enter grandchild world. You know, it doesn't work for grandchild to enter grandma world. It has to go the other way. There are some grandparents that I hear that sometimes say, well, I don't text. And if you ever say that, you just get over it and you learn to text, because that's your grandchild's world and they text. And if you want to communicate to them, you have to learn to communicate in the way that they do. And you need to communicate just as often and as much as you can. And then, of course, don't just do the technology. Don't forget the old ways as well. You know, one of the things that Wayne has mentioned and done is snail mail. And, think about it. Our grandkids never get anything personal in the mailbox anymore. And you can take something that's old-fashioned and making something that's fresh and new by sending them a postcard or something like that. But you can begin to do that. You need to communicate as much as you can and as often as you can with your grandchildren. So do that. Second thing is this. Make sure that when you do visit your grandchildren, when they live at a distance and you make the effort to go and see them or bring them to you, I would recommend that you spend individual time with each of your grandkids. You know, you accomplish one thing by family time together, but you also accomplish something by spending individual time with each grandchild. I would say this is especially important as they get into the teenage years. This is something that Diane and I decided that we were going to start to practice a number of years ago. And so every time we go to visit our older grandchildren, which do live at a distance, we will call ahead or email ahead or text ahead, and we'll say, we're coming, and we want to spend time with each of you. Well, now they're older teens and young adults, and they have jobs and all that stuff, but we say, you know what? We want you to set aside a time. Let's figure it out. And every time we go, we take one out for breakfast, one out for coffee, and so forth. We spend individual time with each one. You know what we find out? We have all sorts of conversations with them in private that they would never, ever talk to us about when they're in the family setting. And it gives us an opportunity to put input into their lives And so that has become something that we just do on a regular basis. The last one is this, to create memories through special events. There are more and more grandparents that are doing things like Camp Grammy and Camp Pappy, or they'll call it Cousins Camp or something, but it's a time where they create special memories, and they'll get the grandkids together and let the parents go off and have 3 or 4 days away from the kids. They'll take all the grandkids, it wears them out, just wears out Grandpa and Grandma so much, but they get them together and they do some fun things together, and they do some teaching together, and it really becomes like a Bible camp experience just for the grandchildren in that family. And we're seeing more and more grandparents do that, but creating special memories, taking trips together, taking one of the grandchildren on a special trip, or doing something that. Creating the special memories is a way that you can, when you are with them, and they live at a distance, but when you are with them, make sure that it's something that really has an impact. All right, let's go to the other two issues and talk about them, because these are really significant. Before I do, though, I want to ask you to do something in your notebooks, and you see that you have some boxes in your notebooks. I want you to take out your pens, and I want all of you to participate in this with me. But you see that there are 2 reminders. Reminder number 1, here's what I want you to do. I want you to draw a vertical line in the center of the box and write the word now above it. I'm going to put it on the screen. I want you to copy what's on the screen. And then I'm going to tell you something that all of you know. I don't expect that anyone here does not know this. I also expect that you've told other people this. You probably already, all of you have told your kids this thing, but in order to have the discussion we want to have, I need to remind you of something you already know. Okay, so you've all you made the line and wrote now, is that correct? What goes on the left side of the line? Left side of the line represents what? The past. What does the right side of the line represent? The future. Now here's what you already know, and I want you to write it down. I cannot change the past. What? I can only change what? The future. Now, some of us would like to change the past. We would really like to undo our daughter's wedding. We'd like to be able to go back and change who it is that she married. We'd like to change the past. We'd like to take back those harsh words that we said 20 years ago. We'd like to take back the time where we gave our teenage child permission to go to a party, and then it ended up having a devastating impact in one way or another on their lives. We'd like to change the past. We'd like to go back. But we can't. Amen? We can't. We can't change what we just ate this morning. We can't change where we slept last night. We can't change anything about the past. We can't change the car we drove today. Nothing about the past can be changed. And yet many of us live wanting to change the past, and we can't change it. So the only thing we can change is what? The future. The only thing we can do is, so what do we do here? It doesn't do any good to have regrets or anything like that. The only thing we can do is move forward with what is ahead. Now, here's the second exercise for you. Reminder number 2. In your book, there are some lines, and I want you to do this. I want you to write your name, your spouse's name, and then the name of your kids and their spouses. Some of you may have way too many for the lines, but just fill up the lines, as many as you have. Your name, your spouse's name, if you are married, and then your kids' names and their spouses until you fill up the lines, okay? That'll be sufficient if you do that. So take a second here while I'm talking and just fill that in. You see that I've done that on the screen. My name is Larry. My wife's name is Diane. Our children are Andrea and Ryan. Andrea is married to Paul. Ryan is married to Kirsty. So that's my little tribe. Not too big of a one, but that's my tribe here, and I want you to write your name. So everybody have it down? Pretty much have it done? Next point in the exercise. I want you to circle the name of the person or persons that you can change. Okay? I'm going to do it. Here's the way mine looks right there. That's who I can change. Who can you change in your family? Now, here's the thing. We'd like to. We'd like to change our family members sometimes. You can't do anything to change. Only they can and the Holy Spirit can, but you can't. You cannot be the one to change them. God has to do it with their willingness and their cooperation. You understand that? So as we move forward and we talk about these things that are more difficult, we understand we cannot change others. That went in the blank. We can only change ourselves. So when we talk about overcoming the obstacles, this is not about how to get somebody else to change, how to solve that son-in-law, that daughter-in-law, what to do with them. Rather, it is about what can we do different, how can we change so that we become an agent for God to use in changing the others that are around us, and then let Him do the work. So 2 things here. We want to talk, first of all, about relational distance. What do we do when there is relational distance? Well, I can't answer all the questions, but let me give you one principle that I think is helpful. A number of years ago, about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Raising a Modern-Day Joseph. It was actually one about encouraging parents to have a spiritual target in raising their kids to follow God. And my reference for that was the Old Testament Joseph. You know, he was a great example. He was 17 when he went into Egypt as a slave. 17, goes into a foreign culture, a pagan culture. He's the only believer in the whole place. He's cut off from his family, tempted every day with sexual sin, treated unfairly because of his faith, and somehow he stands for God and all that. And we say, wouldn't you like to raise a young person like that? You know what that list sounds like? Sending your grandchild off to a secular university today. So similar. And yet this young man stands for God. It's an amazing, amazing story. And Joseph, well, that was the intent of the book. But the first chapter was entitled, Letting Go with All 10 Fingers. And the idea of the chapter was this. When you have a child, you have complete control with all 10 fingers of that little baby. The baby's dependent on you, and you control, all things that's really dependent on you. At wise parenting, you gradually give up control kind of finger by finger. You let go a little bit at a time. And for example, when you send them to preschool, that's letting go of control. You're putting them underneath somebody else's care, or kindergarten, whatever it is. And usually the kid's fine, and mom's a basket case when that happens, the first day of preschool. Why? Because somebody else got her baby. And then how many of you remember when your child turned 16 and got their driver's license? You remember that? You'd been taking them out 15 and helping them learn to drive, and then they get 16 to get the license. And they back out of the driveway for the very first time, and you're not beside them in the car. What's a 16-year-old say? Woohoo, freedom, independence, awesome, I'm finally driving on my own. What does mom say? You're just scared of what's going to happen. Why are you so concerned? Because you let go of control. They become more independent. In fact, that's a wise thing. So here's the way it works. In raising kids, we start off with control being really high. And then as the years go by, control wisely needs to go down. Control goes down. This is called, another way of saying this is releasing them to independence. Control goes down. Starts high, goes down. However, wise parenting doesn't just have control. Wise parenting has something else, and it's called influence. So right away, that brand new baby is just getting acquainted with you, doesn't really know, so control's high, influence is low. And then you want, as they get older, as they become teenagers, you want them to do what's right because of your influence, not because you have to control them anymore. And so we want influence to go up as control goes down. Does that make sense? Now, here's what you have in your notes. Some thoughts here. Parenting is a process of letting go as control, but as a grandparent then, how much control do you have of your adult kids? None, because you've let go of control. So you have no more control, but when relationships begin to go sour, and adult kids start making wrong decisions, guess what we do? We revert back to what worked when they were kids. And we start to control again. That's what happens. So, we start out like this, they go like this, now they're out on their own, we have no control, and then along comes a problem. And either through our words or something else, guess what we start to do? We want to up the control again so we can help them to do the right thing. But it doesn't go like this with influence still up here. You know what it does? It's like this. You up the control, guess what happens to influence? It goes down. The more you try to control your adult kids, the more you lose influence. You know why that is? Because control comes through authority. Influence comes through a relationship. So if your perspective on problems and issues with your adult children where there is a relational breakdown, when your perspective or your approach is to step back in and try to control, maybe you try to control through your words or through your advice or something like that, and it isn't working, I want to ask you to think about changing something for the future, not to change them, but to change you, and say, you know what, that wasn't working so good, so I'm going to try something different. And there's some advice in your notes. We want you to get these thoughts down. But that's this. The effectiveness of our influence is directly proportional to the depth of our relationships. You want to influence that adult child that is a barrier to you reaching your grandkids. You want to influence that daughter-in-law, that son-in-law that is keeping you from getting your grandkids. Instead of trying to control, try to demand that you see them and do that because that's what control would be. I want to challenge you to consider something else. And that is to deepen the relationship with them. To think about how I can do that. Focus instead on constructive connections, not on destructive differences. It's critical that you do something like that, to be able to do that. So, if you have a son or a daughter-in-law, or they're, a daughter-son-in-law combination, and relationships aren't very good, I want you to walk out of here and thinking about this. What could I do to initiate reestablishing the relationship? And maybe it's about something superficial for a while. Maybe it's about supporting the same sport team. Maybe it's about enjoying the same hobby. Maybe it's about you stepping in and doing something that they enjoy. Why? So you're going to build a relationship and rebuild trust. And then as you do that, you'll have an opportunity to repair the relationship and end up having an influence in the lives of your grandkids that you haven't had before.